The sun scorched the cracked asphalt of Camp Dusk, a remote base tucked in the shadow of Nevada's jagged hills. A faint hum of machinery pulsed through the air, mingling with the sharp tang of diesel and sun-baked earth. Helicopters squatted in neat rows, their blades still, glinting under the relentless light. At the edge of the tarmac, near a cluster of Blackhawks, a woman stood alone. Her hands were wrapped in worn leather gloves, one gripping a tablet, the other a socket wrench. Everyone called her Sparrow. To the untrained eye, she was just another tech, a contractor blending into the rhythm of the base. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight braid, tucked beneath a faded green cap, and her navy coveralls hung loose, unzipped just enough to let the desert breeze graze her collarbone. A thin scar traced the edge of her jaw, barely visible unless the light caught it. She moved with quiet purpose, her boots scuffing softly against the ground as she checked hydraulic lines on a Black Hawk. Most didn't notice her. Those who did assumed she was a civilian, maybe someone who'd washed out of flight school and landed in maintenance. Her name wasn't on the pilot rosters. Her file showed no combat clearance. No one asked questions. But Sparrow didn't correct them. She worked late, often alone, her silhouette framed by the hangar's floodlights as she disassembled rotor assemblies with a precision that bordered on reverence. Her hands moved like they knew the machine's secrets, every bolt, every wire, every hum of its engine. If anyone had watched closely, they might have noticed the way she lingered near the cockpit, her fingers brushing the controls with a familiarity that wasn't taught in any manual. But no one watched closely. Not yet. Inside the ops building, the air was crisp, smelling faintly of coffee and electronics. Screens glowed with flight schedules and topographical maps of the training ranges. A group of new lieutenants lounged near a water cooler, their voices low but sharp with the confidence of youth. "Check her out," one muttered, nodding toward the glass door as Sparrow stepped inside, her braid swaying slightly. "That's the tech who's always poking around the sims. What's she think she's doing?" Another grinned, tossing a pen in the air. "Probably dreaming of the big chair. Let her clean the consoles." Sparrow didn't glance their way. She crossed the room, her steps measured, and disappeared down a corridor toward the simulator wing. The door clicked shut behind her, swallowing the faint echo of their laughter. In the sim chamber, Major Ellis was wrapping up a session with Lieutenant Carter, a brash pilot with a near-perfect record in dogfight scenarios. They were reviewing a clip of Carter's Black Hawk weaving through a digital ravine, missiles streaking toward a simulated insurgent camp. Sparrow stood quietly at the room's edge, her tablet tucked under her arm. Ellis noticed her after a moment, his brow furrowing. "You need something?" "Requesting sim time," she said, her voice steady, uninflected. Ellis snorted softly. "You're not on the roster. Hell, you're not even cleared for training." "I'm qualified. Your file says otherwise." She didn't argue, just stood there, calm as stone. Carter smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Come on, Major, let her try. Let's see what the wrench turner's got." Ellis hesitated, then tapped the console, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "Fine. 2 minutes. Solo run, mountain terrain, hostile targets. No briefing. Go." Sparrow stepped into the simulator pod without a flicker of doubt, the door sealed behind her. Carter nudged Ellis. "Bet she doesn't even clear takeoff." Ellis shook his head. "She won't make it past the first ridge." But then the screens flared to life. The Black Hawk lifted, not with the jerky hesitation of a rookie, but with a smooth, predatory grace. It hugged the virtual terrain, skimming cliffs at angles that made Carter's jaw tighten. 6 enemy targets blinked onto the radar, scattered across a narrow valley. Sparrow banked hard, dropping into a crevice where the radar signal flickered out, masking her approach. "She's using terrain cover," Ellis muttered, his grin gone. Carter leaned forward. "That's advanced. Where'd she learn that?" A missile locked, fired. A second followed, then a third, each striking with pinpoint accuracy. In under 2 minutes, all 6 targets were gone. The sim faded to black. Silence gripped the room. The pod hissed open, and Sparrow stepped out, her expression as blank as when she'd entered. She didn't wait for questions, just nodded once, and headed for the door. Ellis found his voice. "Where'd you train?" "Didn't," she said, not turning back. As she passed, Carter caught a glimpse of something under her braid, a faint tattoo, a stylized hawk's wing crossed with a dagger. His eyes widened. He'd seen that mark once, in a classified briefing about a unit that didn't officially exist. "Major," he said, voice low. "She's not a tech." Ellis didn't respond. He was already reaching for his phone, dialing a number that connected to someone far above his pay grade. Because if that tattoo was real, Sparrow wasn't just a pilot. She was something else entirely. The desert heat clung to Camp Dusk like a second skin, the air thick with the scent of scorched metal and sagebrush. Inside the hangar, the clatter of tools echoed off concrete walls, a steady rhythm beneath the distant whine of a Black Hawk's turbines spooling down. Sparrow moved through the chaos, her boots silent on the oil-stained floor. Her coveralls were smeared with grease, one sleeve rolled up to reveal a faint burn scar curling across her forearm. She knelt beside a helicopter, her hands tracing hydraulic lines with the care of a surgeon, her green eyes catching the glint of overhead lights. To the crews bustling around her, she was just the tech, reliable, quiet, invisible. That morning, the base was on edge. An intercom crackled, cutting through the hangar's din. A recon team had gone silent in the rugged hills beyond the perimeter, their last transmission garbled, swallowed by static. Details were thin. Possible equipment failure, maybe an ambush. With half the Blackhawks grounded for repairs, the ops room was a storm of shouted orders and ringing phones. Colonel Vance stormed into the hangar, his boots pounding the concrete, his face carved with urgency. "Which bird's ready to fly?" he barked, scanning the line of helicopters. Sparrow straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. "Tail number Bravo 9's prepped. Needs a final systems check, but she'll handle the thermals out there." Vance barely glanced at her. "I didn't ask for your take. Where's the crew chief?" "Off base, sir. I'm lead tech today." "You're not cleared for flight ops. Get it ready and stay out of the way." She didn't argue, just turned back to the Black Hawk, her fingers flying over the diagnostics panel. Avionics, green. Weapons, green. Rotors, balanced. She heard the argument spilling from Vance's office. Two pilots, both fresh from training, debating who could handle the mission. One had barely logged real-world hours in desert conditions. The other was still shaky on low-altitude maneuvers. Sparrow's jaw tightened. She climbed into the pilot's seat, her movements fluid, instinctive, as if the cockpit had been molded to her frame. She flipped switches, checked readouts, her hands steady despite the weight of memory pressing against her chest. That's when the tattoo showed itself. Just a glimpse, where her collar shifted, a hawk's wing, sharp and black, crossed with a dagger's edge. Sergeant Lyle, a wiry logistics tech with too many deployments to count, caught it as he passed by, carrying a crate of ammo. He froze, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am," he said, voice low. "Where'd you get that ink?" Sparrow adjusted her headset, her gaze fixed on the console. "Somewhere far from here." Lyle didn't push. He turned and jogged to Vance's office, bursting in without a knock. Moments later, the colonel stormed out, his eyes locking onto Sparrow like a missile tracking heat. He took in the powered-up Blackhawk, the checklist already cleared, and the call sign glowing on the screen. Shadow Wing 4. His voice dropped, sharp and quiet. "What is this?" "You needed a pilot," Sparrow said, meeting his stare. "The bird's ready." Vance opened his mouth, but Lyle leaned in, whispering something that drained the color from the colonel's face. "You flew under General Kessler in Mosul?" Vance asked, almost to himself. Sparrow didn't answer. She didn't need to. "Get in the air," Vance snapped, his voice carrying across the hangar. "She's lead. Follow her." The Blackhawk's rotors began to turn, a low thrum building to a roar. Sparrow eased the collective, lifting the helicopter's skids off the ground with a precision that silenced the murmurs around her. Dust swirled, stinging the eyes of the ground crew as the machine climbed, its nose dipping toward the crimson horizon. Two co-pilots in a trailing Blackhawk scrambled to keep pace, their voices crackling over the comms with nervous chatter. Altitude checks, fuel readings, clipped questions. Sparrow's voice cut through, calm and final. "Form on my 6, staggered. Radio silent unless you see trouble." She banked toward the hills, the helicopter slicing through the heat haze at 140 knots. The cockpit hummed, every gauge steady, every system answering her touch like an old friend. Below, the desert stretched endless, its ridges casting long shadows like fingers reaching for the stranded recon team. Somewhere out there, a Humvee sat silent, its crew pinned down, their fate hanging on her next move. Sparrow dropped to 60 feet, skimming the terrain, the Blackhawk's shadow flickering over dunes and rock. Her thermal optics flared to life, picking up 4 heat signatures creeping toward the Humvee's position, half hidden in a dry wash. She keyed a private channel. "Chase 2, orbit high left, cover my approach. I'm going in." "Copy, Shadowwing 4, came the reply, the co-pilot's voice tight but steady. She rolled the helicopter into a shallow valley, rotor wash tearing through a haze of dust. The enemy scattered, one stumbling as her nose cannon tracked their movement. She fired a warning burst, 30mm rounds chewing into the dirt just close enough to make them run. The Humvee's radio crackled to life, weak but alive. "Shadowwing, this is Razor Team. 3 wounded, pinned down, vehicles done." "Hold position," Sparrow said. She flared the Black Hawk, hovering just above the ground, her crew chief leaping out to sprint toward the Humvee. Her eyes stayed glued to the optics, tracking 2 hostiles scrambling for a pickup truck mounting a heavy gun. She pivoted, squeezed the trigger, and 3 precise bursts turned the truck's engine into a fireball. 30 seconds later, her crew chief was back, dragging 2 wounded soldiers aboard. Sparrow pulled pitch, the Black Hawk clawing skyward, weaving between rock spires as the chase helicopter fell in behind, carrying the rest of the team. The valley shrank below, a single plume of smoke marking the wreckage of the enemy's plan. The Black Hawk's turbines growled as Sparrow guided it back toward Camp Dusk, the desert below blurring into a tapestry of ochre and shadow. The horizon glowed faintly, the sun sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of amber and bruise purple. Inside the cockpit, her hands moved with quiet certainty, adjusting throttle, scanning readouts. The chase helicopter trailed her, its cargo bay heavy with the recon team. 2 wounded, 1 critical, their medic's voice a steady murmur over the comms. Sparrow kept her focus forward, her green eyes reflecting the dim glow of the instrument panel. The tattoo on her neck, that hawk's wing and dagger, caught a flicker of light as she tilted her head to check the radar. She circled the base once, letting the chase bird land first. Medics swarmed the tarmac, their silhouettes sharp against the floodlights as they pulled the wounded from the second helicopter. Sparrow brought her Blackhawk down with a gentleness that belied its bulk, the skids kissing the asphalt like a sigh. The rotors slowed, dust settling in lazy spirals. She unstrapped her harness, climbed down, and planted her boots on the ground with a soft thud. Around her, the base seemed to hold its breath. Mechanics, pilots, even a few MPs stood frozen, their eyes tracing her path from the cockpit to the hangar's edge. Colonel Vance pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of stone, his flight helmet tucked under one arm. He stopped a few feet from Sparrow, his gaze dropping to the tattoo now fully visible, streaked with sweat and grime. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his voice cut through the silence, low but clear. "I flew with a Shadowwing in Basra, 2010. They pulled my squad out of a Hellfire ambush." Sparrow met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "That pilot taught me how to listen to a bird's heartbeat." Vance nodded, a slow gesture heavy with recognition. The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like wind through dry grass. The tech wasn't a tech. The quiet contractor who'd spent months blending into the background had just flown a live extraction, saved a pinned-down team, and brought everyone home without a scratch. She'd done it in a Black Hawk most pilots on base wouldn't touch, under a call sign that carried ghosts of its own. Vance turned to the onlookers, his voice rising. Effective immediately, Captain Nora Cade is reinstated to full flight status and takes lead on Black Hawk operations. Questions go through me. His eyes swept the crowd, daring anyone to speak. No one did. Sparrow, Nora, exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. She glanced at the Black Hawk, its fuselage scarred and dusty, still humming faintly as the engines cooled. Her gloved hand brushed the hull, a quiet moment of connection, as if the machine had been waiting for her all along. The base snapped back to life around her, tools clanging, radios crackling. But in that small pocket of space by the helicopter, something had shifted. Respect settled like dust after a storm. She turned toward the hangar, her helmet under one arm, her braid swaying slightly. The murmurs followed her, a mix of awe and apology, but she didn't linger to hear them. She didn't need to. The sky was hers again, and everyone on base knew it. Hours later, as the desert night cooled, Nora stood alone in the hangar, the rolling door half open to let in the breeze. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. She reached for her toolkit, then hesitated, her eyes drifting to a locked steel cabinet in the corner. It hadn't been opened in years. Outside, the base buzzed with new energy. Word of her flight had spread like wildfire. A young airman, Private Torres, approached cautiously, his boots scuffing the concrete. "Ma'am," he said, almost hesitant. "How'd you know the engine's pitch was off just by sound?" Nora turned, her gaze steady, calculating. "It's not just sound, it's feeling. You live with these machines long enough. They talk to you." Torres grinned, half nervous. "You sound like you were born in a cockpit." She tapped her wrench against her thigh, twice, and said nothing. But as she walked away, the cabinet loomed in her peripheral vision, its lock glinting under the fluorescent lights. The next morning, Colonel Vance was back, his presence like a storm front moving across the tarmac. He'd been on the phone all night, digging through files that didn't officially exist. He pushed open the hangar door, finding Nora already at work, elbow deep in a rotor assembly. "Cade," he said, his voice clipped. "You bypassed 3 safety protocols yesterday. Care to explain?" She didn't look up. "Your protocols would have fried the tail rotor. Ask your chief engineer if you don't believe me." Vance's jaw tightened. "You wrote those protocols, didn't you?" Nora straightened, wiping her hands. She handed him a faded folder, its edges worn, stamped with the insignia of a covert ops unit long since dissolved. Inside was her DD-214, honorable discharge, pilot designation, black zone clearance, and a second document, heavily redacted, tied to a CIA contractor program. Vance scanned it, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like disbelief. "Shadow Wing 4, he muttered. "They said you went dark in 2018. Nora's eyes flicked to the Black Hawk behind her. "I didn't go dark. I was erased." A long silence followed, broken only by the distant thump of rotors. Another Black Hawk was in trouble, a training op gone sideways, a partial engine fire, mayday calls crackling over the radio. Every pilot was either in sims or grounded. The only bird ready was the one Nora had rebuilt from the ground up. She looked at Vance. "Let me take it." He hesitated, then tossed her a helmet. "Go." The hangar doors rolled open. Nora strode toward the Black Hawk, her steps steady, the weight of her old call sign settling over her like a second skin. The base watched in silence as Shadow Wing 4 climbed aboard, the rotors spinning up, slicing the dawn air with a pulse that refused to be ignored. Weeks later, Camp Dusk had changed. A new name echoed through the mess halls and briefing rooms, not Nora Cade, but Echo 4. It appeared in whispers, in after-action reports, in the quiet nods of soldiers who'd seen her fly. She didn't wear the wings they offered, didn't show up for ceremonies. But when she spoke, the room listened. Her tattoo, once hidden, was now a quiet declaration, visible above her collar. Not for pride, but because she no longer needed to hide. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Nora stood on the tarmac, her Black Hawk silent behind her. A figure approached from the shadows, a civilian, lean, mid-40s, no insignia. She tensed, her hand tightening on the wrench she still carried. "Didn't think I'd find you here," he said, his voice soft but familiar. "Took you long enough," she replied, not turning. "Thought you were a ghost until I saw the report." She faced him, her eyes catching the last light. "I thought you died in Aleppo." "Almost did," he said. "You got me out. Now I'm making sure they don't forget you again." Nora looked away, toward the line of helicopters under the floodlights. "You still fly, Nora?"